morning. I'd like to call the Budget Committee to order and ask for approval of the minutes from September 10th. Moved by Fred, seconded by Bud. Any additions or corrections? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. The first item this morning will be an update on the multi-year financial plan. Currently you have a summary in front of you. The items that are not included in the summary, there's a few of them here. Additional snow and ice, which is $238,000. The radios and communications, $600,000. There's no money for courts. Additional computer reserve of $83,127, and additional $50,000 for contingency. The airport fuel tanks are budgeted for a 5% match. Without the grant, we'll have to budget for the whole project. Soil and water hazard mitigation plan, there's a match for that. The reallocation of caseworkers is $139,190. That's approximately $30,000 to the county. Reallocation of payroll supervisor is $2,853. And personnel, department head request and 2% across the board for all non-bargaining positions plus fringe, $782,518. This does include the additional correction staffing, which is $508,968 plus fringe, for a total of $1,895,688. So with that, I'll ask the county administrator to reveal the multi-year plan where it stands currently.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, in the documents that were handed out, I just caught an error. The additional correction staffing of $508,000, that actually is in our multi-year plan. So that $1,895,000 would drop by $500,000 down to $1,393 roughly, I guess it would be, or 1,393. So we just took $500,000 off of there. Yes.
We're kind of lost here.
Yeah, where we looking?
Oh, okay. Did everybody get this sheet here or no? Is that the problem? Well, there's our problem.
There's the problem.
All right.
I was trying to write it down, but I didn't get it all.
Joanne will copy that for you, and we'll get back to that.
Doesn't match with what the other said.
Maybe just back up for a moment. Let's go to the multi-year plan, maybe just talk about that for a moment. Last time we handed out a multi-year plan, went over it, and we ended up with really the big sheet being, the key sheet being this sheet right here. Everybody have that? This,
Yes.
Okay. So, when we get all said and done, the multi-year plan, really what it's trying to do is it's looking at all of the revenues, the projections of those revenues. It's looking at the costs that we're going to have, the projection of those costs over a number of years. And really, here's what I really focus on, and so-called the bottom line, if you will, and it literally is the bottom line. If you go all the way down to the bottom of the charts, you'll see at the very bottom where it says actual estimated general fund surplus. And you'll see that if you look in that squared off column for 2014, you go down to the very bottom, you'll see a number that says that we have in our estimated general fund surplus $12,753,000. That is a healthy surplus balance. If you'll recall, the Board of Supervisors a number of years ago adopted a resolution that said that our surplus fund balance should stay somewhere between $6 million and $12 million. Now, that was adopted in the very early days, when the county was having some considerable financial difficulties with its fund balance. For those of you who weren't here at the time, the fund balance had dropped down so far that the county had to borrow money for cash flow purposes. And so, in part of that, those early days then, was trying to rebuild that fund and have some reasonable targets, if you will, that we could meet. So we set the floor at $6 million, but I will tell you that $6 million, if you're at $6 million, you're really in trouble from a cash flow standpoint. I know our treasurer feels that that number should be considerably higher. I would say $7 million. I think Mike might even argue more. But I would say, I'm talking about, you know, before you're really in serious trouble that you're probably borrowing, I put it around $7 million. So you always want to maintain that fund balance. So that's the line I'm looking at all the time to make sure we're not in trouble. Now, the trouble is those $7 million, if that's the bare minimum you need for cash flow purposes, then that doesn't protect you against anything else. It doesn't protect you against a sudden occurrence where you need some quick cash to fix something. It doesn't protect you against a downturn in the economy where we did see that, where obviously a very bad one several years ago where our sales tax revenues really dropped right off. It doesn't protect you against the best call on estimates of expenditures and revenues, because sometimes no matter how good you think your projections are, they don't come in. Example right now, I'll be right up front with you, I am very concerned about our sales tax projections. We had projected 2.5%, well actually 2.2 for this year, but the multi-year plan projects 2.5 in future years. And that was based on historic numbers. It was based on looking at what the state was projecting. It was based on what I thought were realistic expectations of the economy. But for some inexplicable reason, and I don't purport to really understand why, we seem to be struggling, and a lot of other counties are struggling with the sales tax increasing. And this year, in fact, we're at 0.8 increase as opposed to the 2.2 we need. And Rob Lynch just rolled out the latest numbers today, and they still aren't encouraging. Next week, we will have yet another report on sales tax, and pretty much at that time, I think we got to start making some decisions as far as where we think the sales tax is really going. And that's why you want a fund balance, though. Because if, for instance, we don't meet the sales tax number that we projected this year, if you have, say, just to give you an example, say you don't meet it by $500,000. Well, if you have fund balance, like at $12,753,000, okay, you're all right. You can use it, and then you can recalculate your plan going forward, and we have plenty of time to readjust, whether it be by cuts, whether it be by finding additional revenues. The important point is that we have time. If your fund balance were at $7 million this year, and you had to pay, and you lost $500,000 worth of revenue, all of a sudden you've got a problem, because now you possibly may be entering borrowing territory, which you don't want to be into for cash flow purposes. So when I look at that bottom number then, this year I'm seeing 12.7, I say, okay, this is great. I look at next year, we're obviously appropriating some of this fund balance to make everything work, which is okay. That's fine to do. When you have a healthy fund balance, you want to appropriate some of it to make it work, but the thing is, you have to always remember is that once you appropriate it, and if it's for reoccurring expenses, then you got to have a plan. You have to have a plan that works you through the appropriations and eventually lightens the load. Otherwise, it's like dipping into your savings account to make your mortgage every month. Eventually, your savings account is gone. But if you have a plan that you anticipate rising revenues or you anticipate lower costs, like say you're borrowing against your savings account to make your mortgage payment, but you know your car payment's going to end in 6 months, so then you know that, okay, that's all I'm going to take from it, and thereafter, maybe I can start adding to my savings account again. So really that bottom line, like I say, you look at that, and you see going out, we drop to 11, we drop down to 10.8, but then we start coming back up to 11.1 to 11.92. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, and this is the one I spent some time on already, and I won't go back over it, but it is this 2.5% sales tax increase. We're counting on every one of these years to have a 2.5% sales tax increase. If that doesn't come to bear, that's going to really affect that bottom line number. The other thing that's really changed, just so you know, is, and this is still subject to Personnel Committee review tomorrow, But based on the best available information that we have right now, there will be, like I say, a full review done before the Personnel Committee tomorrow morning to make sure that all these numbers are correct and that the committee agrees with the manner in which we're proceeding. But we're now projecting that health insurance benefits, instead of a standard 8 across the board, we're projecting now a 4% increase for next year and then 6% increases for future years. And as will be explained in the Health Committee meeting, or the Personnel Committee meeting tomorrow, this has to do, everything to do with the fact that the county has been progressive, and we've done a very good job in managing our health care products and the way we're contracting for our health care services, and we'll get into detail more about that tomorrow. But that's a good news story, and so that's what, and the reason I'm pointing this out is that if you look at this sheet today, it will be different than what was handed out to you at the last budget session meeting, because it actually looks better, and that's a good thing. But as I mentioned, you know, we still have the sales tax issue that we're going to, you know, that should generate some discussion. Another thing that we changed since last time is that we projected a decrease in revenues in the general fund by $101,000. We also projected a debt service payoff for the Lake George Environmental Park ban, which saves us $48,000. We also, and I guess that's it. The other funds, the Road Machinery County, Westmount, they all get the benefit of the health insurance. That's probably the single biggest thing that drives this, other than the sales tax. Now, the other point I want to emphasize again, just so that we don't miss this, because this could be a little confusing on this report. That bottom line number, and this is very important, assumes that we will not have the Westmount liability that you see in the gray. If we have the Westmount liability in the gray, if Westmount is not dealt with in some fashion, what will happen is, just to give you an example, you start off with 12 million, you see the 11 million, you got to take away 1,775,000. So now that 11 million all of a sudden becomes 9 something. And then that 10 million, you got to take it away again the next year. And so your fund balance all of a sudden is being used up for operating costs, and if Westmount continues on this track, this will put the county into a serious problem financially. So we have built the model, if you will, based on an assumption that Westmount will be sold in the very beginning of next year. And based on everything that's happening to date, we still have every reason to believe, realistically, that we can reach a contract with Specialty Care, and that should be happening within the next few weeks, certainly before the budget has to be finalized. So there's some decisions that are going to have to be made in that regard with the budget. If you budget the money that's needed for Westmount, if you budget a whole year, that's going to change everything in terms of your fund balances, in terms of what you need to raise as far as taxes go. But if we don't have to budget that, it actually turns out that the sale could lead the county into a much better position financially as far as our tax increases and meeting our needs. So those are the big issues in terms of the multi-year plan. If you'll recall, at the end of the slides last time, we had a number of things that we suggested that the board talk about. I know that the chairman of the Budget Committee has a list of items that he wanted to talk about. By the way, did you hand out that sheet, Joanne, to everybody?
Yeah.
Does everybody have that sheet now? This one here?
Yes, I've got it.
Okay, I just wanted, so what I was referring to is, these are the items, and this is the other critical thing to know in our multi-year plan, these are the items that we have not yet addressed in the multi-year plan because we weren't sure where these items are going. These are brand new items, you know, the snow and ice, the radios just came up the other day. The court system, we still don't have a number for it. All these other numbers, but the one that has the mistake in it is the 782,000. That 500,000, since we knew about the corrections officers, we have planned that in the multi-year plan. Just like, by the way, we did plan the decrease in mortgage tax. Anything that we knew about, we planned into the multi-year plan. But these other areas here that are listed, we did not plan into the multi-year plan, and they still are items that will need to be adjusted. The last point I'll make, though, is on the court system and on the OES radios, they are not as bad as you might think, because I think those are gonna be situations where you're probably gonna wanna look at bonding, and the bonding actual impact will be deferred out probably to 2016, 2017, depending upon how everything works. We'll certainly wanna take advantage of low interest rates. There's a lot of planning and fiscal planning that would have to go around that, but I'm not as concerned about the OES radios and courts. One exception to that, and the only exception to that is on OES radios, we will need to look at what it is they wanna buy for the $600,000 and whether or not it's bondable and for what period it's bondable. That will be an issue. So that's gonna require a legal review by Martin under the local finance law. So there's still some issues here, and that's the whole idea of today's meeting, is to introduce the issues and entertain a dialogue. Mr. Chairman, I turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Paul? Yes,
Yeah,
Brett?
I just got a question on the health insurance. You know, I was hearing numbers like the town level that are closer to what you're saying, but then yesterday I had a call from our broker who said that the Medicare Advantage plans were gonna go up 45%, is that?
We're seeing an increase in the Medicare Advantage plans ourselves, but our broker has shopped around for a less expensive plan, and that'll be one of the things that we talk about tomorrow, is switching from the current Medicare Advantage plan to another one. But there are increases happening in that arena.
And then that's all accounted for in this
Yes.
4% number?
Yes. Now, we've done very well on our self-insured drug card, as well as, we have what we call a minimum premium arrangement for our insurance, so we're not self-insured, but we're not totally experience rated, we're kinda like somewhere in between, and it's been working out very well for the county.
Anything else? If not, we'll,
I had a quick question, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
Mr. Westcott.
Sorry, I was trying to figure this out. Maybe in the social services budget meeting we had, I thought is this reallocation of caseworkers, the 139,
it's actually approximately 30,000 to the county.
30,000 to the county?
Right.
Okay, that's
Right.
what I wanted to get across to the committee. 'Cause
At the social services committee meeting, it was 50, but that was at 62% reimbursement, and I believe Julie put it at 78%, so
Okay,
now they're about 30.
so the hit to the county is 30?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And that would further reduce that bottom line, so that should have been reflected as well.
At the end of, our last meeting, at the end of the multi-year financial plan, there was, 8 items there that, for consideration, I guess we'll run down them, and, if anyone has any, questions or comments about them, now's the time to air them. First was the revenue, projections. You just heard Paul discuss the sales tax. Obviously, we're figuring for a 2.5% increase each year, but that doesn't seem likely this year. In 2014, we had a 1.57% property tax levy, which was amounted to $463,000. There's gaming revenue that we're budgeting at $500,000. That's from the agreement the governor got with the Indian casinos. There's revenue due to increased expenses. For example, office for the aging, social services, public health. That's $790,997. Additional revenue at the jail, we're budgeting additional $300,000. And there's also a reduction in the mortgage tax revenue of $200,000. So with the sales tax, which is $1.25 million, the total revenue increase projected is a little over $3 million, 3.1. That was the first item on the on that last page. Any? Yes, Mr. Westcott.
With our sales tax this year up currently 0.8%.
0.8.
That's off plan about $500,000.
Yeah, we're short about $500,000 from budget.
the 2.5% going into next year seems more and more aggressive as we go along.
Does, yep.
Probably should be looking at calendaring that back.
Is there,
Yes.
is there something that we could be doing to increase sales tax revenue?
I guess the question would be is what's causing the drop? We talked about whether or not the online purchases are making a difference, because we saw these drops in the fourth quarter each time, which is of course right around Christmas time, and we know a lot of people now buy online and have gifts shipped. So the question is are we missing a lot of revenues from that? We've been debating that because there are a number of companies. First of all, if you have a presence in New York State, they have to collect it anyway. And there are a number of companies that are collecting it, the big ones. I think, Rob, you told me you think Amazon is collecting. So that's one of your biggies. So we're not sure how much of an impact that has. But sales tax ultimately really depends on people buying things. And,
Right.
you know.
Well, I guess my point is, should we be doing more, especially in the off-season, to promote our local retail, restaurants and so forth? You know, and maybe trying to generate some more sales tax dollars that way?
Well, I think your tourism department's already trying to do that,
Well, I know,
an occupancy
and
tax.
we've had this discussion. You know, it's not focused on the retail industry. It's focused on come and visit. Well, that's good, but while you visit, let's shop, that kind of thing. Could we maybe tweak that, maybe increase our revenues from our sales taxes by making a little bit more effort promoting it? That's what I'm
Yeah.
suggesting.
And one of the things is, of course, we will have something to promote with the new expanded outlets here right up the street.
Right.
Yes, Dan?
When we get into the discussions of a sales tax, we had asked if there's a breakdown from the state as far as cars, big ticket items, if that's dragging, and the different sectors. And I thought we said that was available, but it takes a lot of time to get, difficult to plug in and help us out with the budgets. But that we were going to start trying to track that. And I've never seen it produced, but is there anyone that's ever worked on that, or?
That would go to your treasurer. I don't know where you guys are on that. I think you tried in the past, haven't you?
Sorry, I missed the question, Mr. Westcott was on. What was it, Dan, what was the question?
Well, there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. I mean, we do as much tourism promotion, people come, spend their money, et cetera, but, we're always wondering, when it looks like a good year, where are we deficient? Is it in the big ticket items like car sales? Are they down in the area, or the county residents? Or is it in, retail and the clothing, or, what is suffering? And does the state break it down as far as reporting? My understanding is, the way.
And when they do give us any information, it's almost 2 years back or more. The last time I got a report from them, basically all it was about 60,000 entries, and it just said how much that particular company or whatever it was paid in sales tax for the period that they gave me for the report. That was it. No comparison to previous years or anything else. And it's almost impossible to go through the report because it isn't even based on zip codes or anything. Because, Walmart might be paying from Missouri, so it's gonna be a Missouri address or, the zip code. So it's very difficult, I tried to.
Yeah, and I didn't want to, I just thought if it's helpful, trending and knowledge-wise as far as us.
Right.
But just listening to what I watched, there was several things last year. They think this fourth quarter is going to be substantially better than last year. We have a longer Christmas season. It was very much shorter last year. We were in the middle of a government shutdown that lasted like a week, that certainly perpetuated a lot of anxiety and lack of confidence. And the retail projections for the fourth quarter are supposed to be substantially good. So I know where we are right now isn't where we wanna be, but we still have a quarter, left to report, and the Christmas season generally is where the bulk of the sales tax, I think that quarter is substantially the best one. And, so it's just arriving at where we wanna be, 2.5 or 2 or 1.5,
Right.
where do we wanna end up?
I like your optimism. Yes, Mark?
I like it too. I just did the weighted average. We have to come up with 6.56% for the final quarter to make our 2.2% number. So it's just dependent on how optimistic we think we can be in the final quarter.
Yeah. Yes,
Historically, that fourth quarter for the last several years has not been good. I mean, I know last year there was a lot of reasons why, but historically, the fourth quarter has been tapering down
Yeah.
every year.
Third quarter is usually the highest, isn't
Yeah,
it?
third quarter is the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should say, third quarter would be
Yeah.
the best.
Bud?
In preparation for what I'm starting to call Mission Impossible, this is a sales tax reallocation committee that the chairman asked us to look at. But I've been talking a lot with the state, I've been talking a lot with John DePaul at the state levels and the attorney for the tax department. And I asked them specifically the question about, can you find out by zip code the amount of sales tax? And his short answer was no. And I said, well, if you do it for cars, why can't you do it for everything else? And he said, well, we don't do it by zip code for cars, we do it by street address, and then apparently the state matches that up to a zip code before they pay it to us. But I guess I'm going through a lot of rigmarole here, but the bottom line is, they're telling us at the state, we cannot get that information, even though that would be a great tool for
Right.
economic development. The other thing that came up is that I talked a lot before about some of the things that are happening that are gonna increase sales tax. We've got the Price Chopper up in Warrensburg, we've got the Sagamore that's now staying open for the full season. We've got the new outlet malls. Next year, they're gonna break ground for Hacker Boats, and that's gotta be a big sales tax item. But I think the problem is we're just a little too aggressive with our 2.5%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got the festival space too coming up
right.
next year.
Right. Well, I know, when we budgeted what we budgeted last year, and then we had the adjustment there at the end of the year, I've talked to a gentleman that's an auditor for other counties and towns, and he told me that adjustment could've went back as much as 4 or 5 years. That, it wasn't necessarily all last year, and it could've been 1 or 2 businesses, or it could've been a whole bunch of them over a long period of time. I guess my only point in mentioning that is hopefully that won't happen again, is what I'm trying to say. So, we had that adjustment, and hopefully that covered a 3-4 year period, and, we're on a little more stable ground, 'cause that, we lost a good chunk of money right there. So. Yes?
Mr. Chairman, where on the agenda you want to discuss, the snow and salt?
I'd like to get through these, considerations here. There's 8 of them. There is another payment of sales tax, next week, I think, right? So, that'll tell the story. Good part of it.
And Mr. Chairman, what we can do, for the committee, and this is why this is a living document, this sheet right now that we're focused on, is if it was determined that a new sales tax projection should be used for this year and any future years, then we have the ability to put that in, and then you can see what here again, I think all the focus needs to be on the bottom line, because that really tells you your story. So then you can see what the impact is on the bottom line. And the same thing with cost. When we add the cost in, we can put it into this plan, and then you can see the impact on the bottom line.
The next item was, any programs, services, projects, or activities that we feel should be undertaken or terminated. Is there anything anyone would like to, terminate besides the airport?
I didn't say anything.
That's just a joke.
Mr. Chairman, that is included because of the fact that your multi-year plan that we build for you is based on an assumed model that says all services, tax rates, everything is going to stay the same as it always has been, which, as you folks know, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be whatever the board ultimately determines. The key is, though, is that if you wanted to start a new program, for instance, you need to find the funding for it. Or if you wanted to cut a program, obviously that would give you funding for some other programs. But if you're satisfied with what you see generally as what is being done by the county and what we're projecting to do at this point, between everything that's been given to you, then that question would just be dealt with by saying, okay, we're fine with it. But if you feel you want to make some changes, this is the time that you would discuss that, because this is going to affect, here again, not only this budget, but future budgets.
Yes, Rachel?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure when exactly the appropriate time is to talk. You're talking about services and programs. I just had a question regarding the VA position. Is this appropriate, or would you prefer I wait?
Sure.
During the budget meeting, and I've spoke with Supervisor Frazier about this as well, we had discussed the secretarial position in the VA department, and that over the course of 5 years there's been significant turnover, or she's at 5 on her 5th secretary, because it's a part-time position, which the pay is relatively low. And I know Paul and Joanne, you guys looked into this as well in terms of what her salary is. And she had made the argument, or the director of the program, that if in fact she was able to take this position to a full-time position, she could increase revenues, meaning taking off veterans that perhaps were receiving some social services benefits or some other county dollars and transferring them over to where they should be getting the maximum amount of benefits allowed to them under the VA standards. And certainly we want to put as much effort and emphasis as we can on our veterans, but I'm just wondering if that's something that had been considered since the budget discussions, or if this was something that, recognizing by going from a part-time to a full-time position, we're actually increasing the revenues and paying for her salary. I know some grant dollars were going to be looked into, but nothing had come to fruition. So,
Right.
like I said, I'm not sure if it's the appropriate time, but as it relates to services, it seems like it's applicable.
The plan, when we had our budget meeting with veterans, the plan was to look for some grant dollars. That hasn't really panned out too well. Denise did indicate that with a full-time person there, that she felt that she could acquire more grant dollars, that she feels there's a lot of grant money available, and that with the workload that she has, like the everyday workload, she doesn't have the time to pursue those grant dollars. I believe I'm correct.
I think that's it, Mr. Chairman, and also just providing the services to the veterans was a concern. We are continuing to look into that, though, and you may want to consider on all the personnel, because there are a number of personnel items that perhaps, because they're, I think it's appropriate to bring up any services like we just discussed, and I think it was certainly good that that was just brought up. But anything that relates to personnel that you want to do, I would suggest you give us a little bit more time to study it, and then we can bring back a full personnel proposal on all the personnel matters.
Yes, John?
Well, as far as grant writing, you can outsource your grant writing,
Right.
which sometimes is more effective because you're dealing with people that know how to write the grant, and we all know how important that is
Right.
to being successful and being rewarded the grants. So, I don't know. On another topic, if you want to
Yes.
move. Do we, I know the discussion in the newspapers and all has been about, allocating some more dollars towards roads and improving roads. Is that something that we should be looking at?
Well, for this budget for this year, for 2014, we had 1.65 million in CHIPS. We levied $350,000, and then we took $1 million from fund balance. when Jeff submitted his budget, he had removed the $350,000, which we promptly returned to his budget. So we set at $2 million currently.
Yeah, I know I was part of that, but my only question was, you know, and Jeff's not here, is that it? Oh,
Yeah, he's watching.
Jeff is here, he's in my seat. Is it enough to keep a viable road program going? And we don't wanna get too far behind, and then it's gonna end up costing us more down the road.
Right.
And do we have a program right now that sets us on a healthy course?
Well, my hope was to build on the 350, but it was removed, so, when we put it back in, it's kinda hard to grab another 250 and add to it. But,
Well, I think that discussion has to take place.
yeah, I think we'll have that discussion here in a few minutes. Yes, Mark?
Chairman, you had to go ahead and mention the airport.
You didn't have to bring it up, though.
Well, since he did, I feel an obligation to speak. In 2012, our operating budget for the airport was a net $695. In 2013, it was a net $835. What are we projecting in this budget for an operating budget?
I can't tell you that right off the top of my head.
Okay,
I'd have to look it up.
We can talk about that offline.
Yep.
And also, I have a question for the treasurer. Our bond payments on the hangars, how long do those run out for? Paying about $880,000 a year.
I think those were banned, so they're 5 years. I don't remember when they started, but I don't think.
We should be coming close to coming to an end on
If
those.
next year isn't the last one, then there's only one after that. But I
All right,
think
that's good news. That'll be 180 savings. I'd ask the committee to look at this.
Yes.
That's the last one that we did.
Okay. The 2014 adopted was $874,796. The 2014 amended actually went down by approximately $600. The 2015 department request is $850, $22. So it's decreased by approximately $25,000.
Thank you.
And our revenues, you don't wanna forget the revenues, was 122.4 for this year, for 2014. It's projected to be 125.9, so, $3,000 increase. Thanks, Jeff. Anything else on, programs? I mean, you can bring up anything whenever you want, but, we'll move on to the use of the fund balance. That's kind of a moving target, but I had a projected, a sheet that was projected on, September 12th. If you add up all four funds, including Westmount, General Fund, County Road, and Road and Machinery, and Westmount, on this particular paper, it totals up to approximately $3.8 million in total fund balance use. The general fund, was, appropriated for 2015, which was, a projection, was $2.2 million. So I guess the question was if we felt that was appropriate. And I guess it depends on what we wanna do. It's appropriate, yes.
Well, I think it is if you assume that, what we're going to do with Westmount takes place in, this coming year. That, if you assume not, then I think that might lead you in a different direction.
Right.
So I think that if you think of that in terms of a one-time
$960,000 of that was Westmount.
Correct. So if you think of that, almost $1 million as a one-time cost, to get us to a certain point in time next year, and I think that it is a, appropriate amount budgeted, would be my assessment. But more to the point on the roads, that what you see in the long-term plan is the result of that, and what that does to our financial condition in the outlying years. It sets the stage for a lot more money to be able to put into, or it creates the potential, at least, for a lot more money. I think I'm reading it correctly. When you look at your projections going forward, I see a decreasing deficit situation, and we go from, well, it's a number of elements, but it certainly has to include Westmount. We go from the 2.5 kind of range to down to almost break-even, break-even situation.
Well, here again, I think what I would refer you to is, again, the bottom line numbers, because the bottom line numbers are built on the assumption that you're gonna be putting into roads roughly $2 million a year, which is far below, of course, what the recommended amount is. And here again, if you look at the numbers, you see at the very end, you're at 11.9, but that 11.9 will get diminished if we change the sales tax dollar amount that we're projecting. It will get diminished if we add additional monies for roads, snowplow for towns, because that's under consideration. It'll also get diminished by whatever the bond payments are that will be required to make for radio and courts. So that number, and so you know, if you take, for instance, that number, I always look at, just maybe to give you another way of looking at it, I always look at 9 million as the safety valve. So when I look out, I'm saying, okay, that 11.9 probably could drop down to around 9.95, and we're okay. So what we need to figure out is, here again, is if you say to me, we want to do this with sales tax, we want this included, we want that included, then what we do is we rerun the sheet for you and see how that impacts that bottom line. And that's what makes it a little difficult in this conversation today, is because we don't, you know, obviously we can't do it on the spot, we need time to run it. But if you were to give me a list of things that you said, these are the priorities that we want addressed in the budget, run that through there and see what it does to the bottom line. If whatever we do, like for instance, you said we want to put $1 million more on roads every year, I can pretty much tell you, and you can pretty much see that that's not going to work, or not based on this current budget, because we know we're going to have those other expenditures. But if you said, let's do all these other things, then let's see what happens to that bottom surplus, and you found out when we were all done, say you're at 10 million, then we can say, okay, well, how much more can we put into roads each year? That's one strategy. Another strategy is to employ the strategy we did last year, and that is, if we turn out better financially in March of the following year than we anticipated, then you could allocate all of that money towards roads. That was another strategy that we had employed this past year. So there's a couple of different ways to do it. But here again, I would always refer you back, because I think that tells the story, and that'll also tell the story for the credit agencies. They're going to look at how are you running as a county, and they're going to look at that bottom line number. Are you using up fund balance with no way of it coming back, or are you fairly stable, having some slight up and downs? And that's what we're trying to do.
Yes, Fred.
The question on this sheet, I don't quite understand this line, the property tax limit, which 2013 was 167 million, and then it, for some reason, goes down to 163 million. What?
That's our constitutional limit, I believe. So
You know why the change?
So why did it go down
Rob does
4 million,
state controller calculation.
or 3 million,
not sure.
more than 3 million?
Rob, do you know why that happens by any chance?
Well, it's generally based on an average of 5 years of full valuation. It's a formula that the state has. There's different factors that affected it. But that's just your tax limit. I mean, we'll never get up to that level.
Yeah, that's 163 million.
That's the constitutional limit, so it doesn't have anything to do with the tax cap.
No.
Right, okay.
Yeah, we're at 40 million for our tax levy, so we're nowhere near what the constitutional limit is.
Yes, Mark?
I have, two questions, and comments. On the roads, the 2 million a year, I could ask Jeff, does that kind of keep us even? Are we falling farther behind? No, we're behind on the get-go, because of the years. What's your opinion on the 2 million?
2 million is not a level to sustain the roads in the condition they are. If we look at our 247 miles of road, if we were overlaying, if an overlay of 1.5 inches of asphalt lasts 10 years, we need to pave about 25 miles a year if we were just doing simple overlay. Our cost for paving about 25 miles a year is about $2.5 million, which include culvert pipes, shoulder stone, and any, for instance, like, guide rail and other features. We spend about $100,000 a mile to do an overlay. So that would be $2.5 million with today's dollars would be our simple program of just overlaying 25 miles a year. What we did this year included some reconstructions to make up for some of the roads that had gone bad. That's why we ended up putting about $3.14 million into our infrastructure this year, into our roads. So we did make up some ground on some of those roads that needed to be reconstructed.
So it sounds like for the 25 miles, the 2 million doesn't quite get you. So are you saying we're continuing to fall behind on that?
It'll mean, I would predict that our pavement grades would go down some. There are, you can survive in that mode for brief periods as long as there's a recovery at some point where you can make up some of that ground. So that's what I would hope that we need to sustain 2 million, but eventually the funding will come back in at a level more than what we need in a couple of years so we can make up that ground.
Thank you. My other, comment is on these lists, not on the, in the budget. I don't really understand each of them in terms of their, priority and, what's mandated. I know we've got to do the court, but is there, a rundown on what we absolutely have to do here, and the ones that are elective?
Yes, you want me to give them an overview?
Sure, if you'd like, I mean,
Because otherwise, how do we determine what to put in and what not to put in? We need to prioritize these.
it's kinda like why we're here, I think, but, I don't know.
Well, just to give a rundown of what you have, is the snow and ice. That is something that the supervisors have been discussing about whether or not you increase payments to towns for taking care of county roads. And what we have sent out were basically two documents. One document set was the state, it's a portion of the state snowplow agreement options. I just simply photocopied from the state docs the way they handle it. And they do payments to municipalities based on either time and materials, which is conventional, or they do what they call an indexed lump sum agreement, or they do a fixed lump sum agreement from the state level. The reason I wanted to give this to you is that you will see in reviewing these that the time and material agreements are a relatively complex way of municipalities at least beginning the process to get what they feel they should be getting in terms of what the payments are for snow and ice removal. The indexed lump sum and fixed lump sum become easier, but they're still based on the original time and materials. So there's a lot of record keeping and there's a lot of analysis that needs to be done up front, and it was pretty extensive. So I thought the easiest way to do it would be simply give it to you to take a look at, and you'll see that I underlined in there key provisions that just to kind of flag them for you. I think the message I want to send on the state formulas is that it's relatively complex, and I think most towns would find the paperwork kind of burdensome. So the other approach was to look at what we also handed out. Jeff did an analysis of what the county's costs are for snow and ice maintenance and what they would be if the county were to do the town roads. And so his analysis, which is, was sent out, do you have that attached someplace?
Yes, it's attached to the
It's
budget.
It's attached to the budget materials that we gave you. Where is it? There it is. It looks like this. Okay? His analysis, if you go to the second page, really ends up being this square black box, and he's telling us that, hey, look, I would calculate roughly $6,784 would be a payment for services if we were doing it from a county standpoint for the roads. If you look at this other sheet that was handed out, you'll see that we're currently paying towns $5,207 for the snow plowing arrangements. Now, Jeff's formula balances it out over a 3-year period. So that $6,800 approximately that you see there, you know, that could vary slightly. Could go up, could go down, depending upon the severity of the winters as you graduate through time. And that was Jeff's suggestion, and I thought that was a pretty good idea, because it would help balance what is paid to the towns and what the county pays out. The other thing I like about it is it equates back to county cost, which, while county costs, you could argue, are going to be different than town cost, I think, though, that there is a legitimate comparison, because that's what the counties would have to pay if we had to maintain the roads. So I think you could make an argument that that becomes a number that we could work with in terms of what's the highest amount we should be paying to the towns as far as that particular piece. Now, the other side of this is that this would, and that's where I get this $238,000, if you went to the full amount, that would be the impact. Now, that's not to say that we have to do that this year. That ultimately becomes a decision that is made by the board. Do we ramp this up? Do we go to the full amount? You know, part of the issue is the towns, of course, don't have to plow our roads. We certainly don't want the towns to lose money plowing our roads. So there's a balance in here, I think, that needs to be arrived at, and fortunately, the board also has town supervisors on it, so we can hear some discussion as to what, you know, may be appropriate in this whole arena. But that's what that number's all about, and the status quo, I can tell you, I think is no longer working from the information that I have. I think you do need to address it in some fashion in this budget and going forward. And like I say, I think the dialogue amongst the towns and the supervisors here, I think will you know, be how you get to wherever you get to on that issue. So that, I don't want to get right into a dialogue on that right this minute. I just want to review through that list, just so you know what they're all about, so I can give you the idea and the priorities. The OES radios, this is something that deals with communications of our fire, rescue, and sheriff. There was a full presentation made at the Public Safety Committee meeting the other day. There will be a presentation made to you at the board meeting concerning this. And there's also been, I believe, an article in the newspaper, so maybe many of you are already on board with this. But they were telling us that some immediate upgrades could be made to our radio system to the tune of $600,000 to $700,000. But they were also telling us that long term, for better communications, you may be looking as much as $6 million for an upgrade. So that's another item that, here again, I think maybe once you get more information at the board meeting coming up, that will help you on this decision-making process as to prioritizing this particular expense. The court system, I think everybody's pretty much engaged in that at this point. We don't have a number on that yet, but I understand that we will start to get some projections as to some possibilities on that number. So here again, in terms of where you go with that. The added computer reserve, I just want to get through all the items, then you guys can certainly discuss them, but just so you know what they're about. The additional computer reserve monies, That is about upgrading our entire computer system for the county. This year, in fact, coming up, I think it's on the agenda for your board meeting, we are asking to put in from the current reserves and use money to upgrade what we call the network system in the county. It's quite old, it needs to be upgraded. Mike Colvin has done a lot of studying on this, so we need to move ahead on that. The balance of the money will be to upgrade our servers. We have many different servers in the county. These are the primary instruments by which emails and all kinds of other information are exchanged between departments. And what Mike is looking at is moving towards what we call a virtualization project, which is essentially taking massive servers that can act in the place of many servers. And that is the current technology, and it will save us money in the end and allow us to not only be efficient, but also have some redundancies to protect our system. But that's another expense. And in regard to the computers, I would encourage you to consider that a priority, because that's one of those systems that if it goes down in the county, unfortunately, it's not, I don't consider it a lot of money, but if it goes down, we could have massive problems, because here again, the servers are aging, and we need to do something. And Mike has, I think, has come up with a very reasonable plan. The contingency amount of $50,000, that is totally optional. Your contingency fund is currently at $250,000. Right now, we have about 43,000 left over. We're in October. I'm just thought I'd throw that out there as a recommendation to consider maybe bumping the 250 to 300. It hasn't been moved in many years. Something you don't have to do, but it's just, it's money you have, as you know, for unanticipated expenditures. And it just seems like we've been getting closer and closer each year to running those funds out. So I suggested that we may want to consider increasing that. Airport fuel tanks, that all depends on, you know, the grant agreements and what we're required to fund. The airport fuel tanks are in trouble. We do have to address that, so that will be something that otherwise we won't be able to store fuel in the current tanks and sell from those tanks. Soil and water hazard mitigation plan, there's not going to be a lot of money involved there. Unfortunately, we don't have that number yet because we are going to get a grant for that. But we're required as a county to have a hazard mitigation plan, and our soil and water agency is the one that's handling that for us. I think the number, if I recall, will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $75,000 for that. That's a plan that we have to have in place by 2016. And since we were able to get a grant for the lion's share of that, I'm certainly recommending that be considered a priority. Reallocation of caseworkers, as has been discussed, the real net cost there is roughly $30,000. This would basically change the pay of caseworkers so that we're able to keep and attract caseworkers to social services positions. Same idea for the payroll supervisor. The personnel request and 2% across the board for non-bargaining. As you'll see, that calculates out to roughly $230,000 or thereabouts. Here again, that's an optional expense, but we are giving union raises, so the consideration is do we make adjustments and pay raises for our non-union staff as well. So that kind of gives you a feel for the items that are in there. Certainly, as part of the budgeting process, you want to prioritize what is most important to the county so that we make sure it gets included in the budget, and that we then try to figure out how we pay for it, whether we need to make cuts other places, etc. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. That help?
Excellent, thank you.
Yes, Matt? Careful.
I have a question. If our sales tax estimates aren't meeting our projections, and we're looking out, wouldn't it make more sense to maybe draw back our sales tax projections, figure out what we need in our surplus, and then work within those confines instead of being, you know, if we're not meeting our sales tax projection this year, we're projecting the same for next year. It just seems a little bit out of order in how we're looking at this budget. And I know this is my first budget I've worked with, but it kind of concerns me that, you know, we're using numbers that aren't more conservative based on performance.
I think that that's certainly a legitimate point, but I think that, just so you know, our calculations on the multi-year plan have come from history. We did 2.6 last year at the end of the day, even though it was a little nerve-wracking near the end of the time period. You know, so that, but it certainly, it is a legitimate concern that if you drop the numbers, then that's significantly gonna affect the bottom line. And I'd be happy if the committee feels that those numbers should be something different, we can certainly revise those and present you with a new sheet.
I mean, I just wondered does it look like we're gonna meet 2014 projections based?
It's hard to say. I think we'll know better next week. I'm still hopeful that this straightens out. Unfortunately, the other piece of information that we won't have is the final quarter. We have had downturns in the final quarter for the past few years, but that's not to say it will continue. The economy has definitely improved. As you know, the Federal Reserve is looking at, you know, obviously that outlook and gonna be making some judgments on their part. You know, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't guarantee you, obviously, one way or another. And we can do whatever you guys wanna do in terms of these numbers, but and we can start wherever you wanna start. I don't think there's any right or wrong here.
Yes, Brad.
I got a question on this sheet. Is that correct? In 2010, our tax rate was $481 a thousand, and now we're down to $454. We've actually decreased by 27 cents a thousand.
Yes, that's an automatic calculation in the worksheet. It automatically calculates.
So we've been
I entered the
decreasing
numbers and,
taxes in the face of increasing mandates and decreasing.
Right.
yep,
There's an increase in value,
yeah, I
a
think the
pretty big
value
one in,
makes a difference.
2013.
So, and maybe I missed it, but I don't see what our tax cap is for the coming year.
I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Our tax cap is, our calculation is 3.63%,
Right.
which amounts to $1,435,363.
So that takes into account that we've been under the tax cap for previous years? Or
Yes,
other
there's,
exclusions that-
There's, let's see, where is it? There's approximately 600 and some thousand in carryover. There's 603 from last year, or from this, available from this year, last year, carryover. So about half, not quite half.
And so these estimates in the four-year financial plan, does that, I mean, what percentage increase is that? I didn't really
We keep the tax increase the same as what it was last year, so all through the plans. We assumed a 1.5, is it 7? 1.57% increase. And here again, it doesn't have to be that, but
Yeah.
the only thing I would caution you on is that anything, first of all, there is that tax cap. The other thing is that while the state will make whole, as long as you stay under the tax cap, through the rebate program for the next couple of years, we don't know what's gonna happen after that. And the one thing we have to be careful of is that if we go up to the tax cap and all of a sudden the rebate program isn't around in a couple of years, then we're gonna have a significant increase in taxes in, real effect. So, we've kept with the 1.57 just because that was what the mission had been as of last year and prior years, is to try to keep that number as low as possible. But you certainly do have flexibility in terms of increasing that number to, something else. For instance, if you wanted to cover a one-time shot or something like that, maybe that would make some sense, but.
Right, that was a strategy that we, briefly discussed yesterday, and, I thought about it some more. We increased the levy 1.57 this year. To me, if you wanna fund the highways, we'll get the state to fund the highways. We'll push up the percentage increase, let the state write the check. We'll take another 1.57 for the county, and let the state write the check for the rest of it, use it towards your roads. And then after a couple of years, depending on once they figure out what they've done, they're gonna shove it back onto us. So then we stop putting that money towards the roads, and, it won't affect our taxpayers. In other words, our taxpayers won't get hit with a 7-8% tax increase because the state's paid the levy.
I'm not sure I follow you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow that either.
How are we getting the state to pay? more
Well,
than
'cause
that?
this, 'cause whatever increase there is in the tax levy this year,
Yeah.
as long as you stay under your cap, the state is gonna, send out rebate checks to the taxpayers.
Aren't they gonna be tiny checks? I mean,
I
it's
don't
just
know.
a gimmick to
Well, I agree,
Yeah,
it's a
force
gimmick,
the
but, you know,
government to do something that
right,
not deal with a local problem.
right. So, they're gonna write the check, 'cause again, as long as we stay under our tax cap. So say we went to 3% and, instead of 1.4, say it's, 1.435, say it's 1.2. And take half of that towards, 1.57 towards our expenses, like we did last year, as the regular levy, take the other half, which could be $600,000, and, levy the money, let the state write the check, take that money and put it towards our roads. And then, in 2 years, like I said, when the state figures out what they've done, that they've basically increased everybody's taxes and they've wrote the check, now they don't wanna write the check anymore, and it's gonna come back to the county, if that's the scenario, which I think that that's what will happen. We stop funding the roads to that level, and, the taxpayers don't get hit with a 8% tax increase. It's a idea, that's all.
I mean, I think considering what this, what the state is requiring of us and mandates just this year, with the increase in the, correction officers, with the pressure to, deal with the court situation, these are mandates, and it seems to me that we should take that into account in determining how close we get to the tax cap, and just the first glance, I don't think it's prudent for us to stay at 1.57% if our cap is 3.63. That's the
Right. Right. I agree.
Because we've got all these other things that are important to the welfare of our residents.
The only thing I get nervous is if we incorporate all that money into our budget, and the state is paying the increase in the levy by rebates, what happens, like I say, after a couple of years? 'Cause as far as we know, this only goes out for, next year and the year after. After that, I don't think they've really decided what's gonna happen. So who's gonna write the check then? Is it gonna be the state of New York still sending out the rebate checks?
No.
Or is it gonna be the taxpayers making up the difference? So I get nervous about incorporating that 1.4 million into our budget completely, because down the road, somebody's gonna pay for it. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good, sound like a broken record, but I'd like to get back to the snow and ice analysis that was done, and first I'd like to thank Paul and Jeff, for doing this. This is the first time, I think, at least since I've been here, I can't speak before, that we've had an analysis on this, and I don't know that there's much that really, in terms of a formula that went into the original snow and ice contract numbers. I think there's a couple of things to say here first, that if you can see by this analysis that we're way short in reimbursing the towns for the work they do on county roads, but specifically, if you look at Chester, Horicon, Stone Creek, and Furman, if you look at this box right here, what you can see is that really the smallest among us have really borne the brunt of that differential, almost I haven't added it other than in my head, but almost 2/3, I guess, of the roads, the 151.49 in roads is accounted for, at least in those 4 municipalities. And I think we should have some discussion as to how we do this. Do we do it all in 1 year? Do we take a 2-year approach to doing this? But I think just as important, what I think needs to happen here year in and year out is I think this methodology and the 3-year average needs to be incorporated into the budget proposal that's prepared by our DPW. And that this really isn't a discretionary thing. I mean, it is, I suppose it's a lot like heating this building. You don't have to pay the bill, but we'll turn the heat on. And I think that in terms of these towns, I think that we really played enough against their goodwill. And I think I'd like to have some discussion, because I don't think there can be any doubt that we need to do something here affirmatively to correct the situation. But I think to keep the situation from eroding going forward, I'd like to see this methodology adopted in some fashion as part of our highway department's annual analysis when they prepare their budget for the follow-on year, because as their salt expenses and petroleum expenses or personnel expenses go up or down, these numbers will be influenced by that reality. And so then we can be assured at least that should we make this move, that that what we accomplished by doing this is preserved going forward, at least to this degree. So again, I'd like to thank Paul and the Commission for doing this, but I'd ask you specifically to think about, especially the smaller towns, and to think about that differential number. Now, what did you say that differential number was? The difference between what we're generally paying for snow.
Well, currently it's
238.
5207, and it'd be, under Jeff's scenario, it'd be $6,700, almost $6,800, so,
About 1,500.
well,
Roughly.
yeah.
About 1,500 a mile. So do the quick math. I mean, it's just for example, in Town Chester, with almost 33 miles, that's a lot of money. And if you go down to Stony Creek, for example, it's 21.
Well, it's more than that, because you got another 9 miles of at the higher rate. That's 30 miles.
Well, that's...
Thurman's the biggest, 35.
Well, that's absolutely correct. So I think that I think our discussion on this is, we'd like it to happen tomorrow. If we can make it happen tomorrow, that would be my recommendation. But if the situation is such that we need to do it in a different kind of fashion, I'll be open to hearing about that. There can't be any doubt that these towns should not be subsidizing these operations, and anybody who's seen the recent price on salt going into next year can appreciate what I'm saying. And I guess if I'm reading the numbers correctly, to implement this plan fully it would be an additional $238,000. Is that right, Paul?
Correct. It is.
$238,000, and I don't know that this should be on the discretionary list, to be honest, because it sounds you're basically reimbursing them for what it would cost us to do it, and which is when you stop and think about that, the additional manpower and equipment and facilities that will have to be constructed to do this would be enormous, is absolutely enormous. So, and I like the 3-year average as well. I like the idea that at least takes into account some winters are worse than others, and so I think it's a job well done.
Evelyn?
Question for Jeff. Jeff, when you did you came up with the average per mile, is that based on what you're plowing now?
Yes, that's based on our actual expenses. What I did do is I factored in a cost of a garage lease. And I added that into our average cost as a hypothetical of, okay, if we did have to place a truck into an area that we don't currently plow, I added that expense, and I projected that expense into that 3,800.
And do we have sufficient staffing and equipment right now? Say all the towns say, okay, we're done plowing for county roads. Do we have sufficient staffing and equipment to take over those roads, particularly, I know probably in Horkin and definitely in Thurman, there are long stretches where I don't know where you'd refill or resupply. Essentially, you could fill your truck and leave, but it's not going to make the loop before you have to do it again. Would
would the numbers that you gave us hold true if suddenly you had to take care of everybody's?
The average cost would hold true. Obviously, we would need additional personnel, so the thought would be, if we took over all the roads, our personnel expenses, our salt expenses, our vehicle expenses would go up, the contract would go down.
Do you think that would jive though?
I'm sorry?
Do you think that the contract going down, would that cover all the increased costs?
Well, what I projected and what I assumed in all these projections, we had a list, I gave Paul a list of assumptions. Our costs are based on 90-minute cycle time, all done, railroad policy. But I also assumed that if we did go into those other areas, that we would co-locate with a town, and that the towns would fill our trucks at cost. Essentially, we would reimburse the towns to fill our trucks. We would reimburse their time, equipment, and material costs, and come up with some rate, so that during a storm, when they're loading out their own trucks, they're loading our trucks as well, and we're paying them a per load rate.
Okay, so that wasn't in there,
I assume those numbers in there would be comparable to what we pay for our labor and equipment costs. So that's the assumptions I made, was that we would load from the town sheds. The towns would load, and we would reimburse them by load for the material, equipment, and labor costs.
Okay, I just wanted to see how we were figuring that in there, it wasn't very clear to me. And then just the other thing, I wasn't clear, Mr. Chairman, when you were speaking about the, tax rebate, so to speak, from the state, I did not follow that conversation, very well.
Okay.
It was my understanding that we'll do what we do essentially and pass our budget, and then the individual homeowners will be receiving checks back, whether or not they're accurate to what the tax increases remains to be seen. But in this case, we would have levied the taxes, they would have paid the taxes, and then hopefully get their check back, and hopefully it would be the right amount.
Right.
So if we've already levied the taxes and they've
Right.
already paid them, I'm not sure how.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I didn't see how it was gonna be a sudden jump if they stopped paying, I mean, other than the fact that, maybe the rebate check wouldn't come, but the tax bill, it should stay consistent, I would think.
Right, I see what you're saying, yep.
All right, well, thank you, I just wasn't clear about that.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that's true, and it just occurred to me, the rebates are only gonna go to the Star, residences, so not everybody will get the rebates. And it just occurred to me, I'm sorry, I should have thought of that sooner, but that would be a problem, because,
Only to the Star residents?
yeah.
Well, that doesn't seem quite right.
I think so, we'll double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's the way that rebate program is set up.
I
Yes.
could, Mr. Chairman, just follow on what Supervisor Wood said. I mean, if you assume for a moment that we're presently staffed and equipped with sufficient resources to do what we're presently doing, then the addition of 250 more miles, or however many miles it is, 200, would require that much more in manpower, that much more in equipment, that much more in facilities by the contractor or built. And so I think that in order to keep this from having to be revisited this way, to this extent in the future, I think what really needs to happen here, aside from how we get from point A to point B, what we do with it going forward. And I think that it should be incorporated and become part of what DPW does annually when they prepare their budget. They do the 3-year average, they put it in the budget at what they feel the actual reimbursement should be, and that way we, whether it's up or down, and that all of us agree to that approach. And, for some towns it means more than others, but it will mean a little bit at least to everybody on the list at some point in time. And I'd just like to hear from the other members and supervisors in the room on, Gene, Chairman of DPW, I know you have to look at the big picture here, but, everyone's thoughts on maybe how do we get this done?
Oh, I guess Chairman's got,
Mr. Chairman.
Tom, stand up, so.
Real quick question.
Okay.
Jeff, how much did it increase this year? My highway superintendent is freaking out because the saw increase is pretty high.
I honestly do not know those numbers yet.
I heard that it's astronomical saw increase going into this winter. That's scary. I mean, he came back to me yesterday afternoon, pretty concerned about the saw increase, so we don't know. I haven't talked to my staff yet on that. Good thing.
Fred?
So, these numbers don't include the sweeping and the mowing, right, Jeff?
The, what I did, the analysis I did is for snow and ice operations only.
Okay.
There was some discussion as to whether you would keep the sweeping, numbers in there. Because really the areas where we're sweeping are necessary because of the application of sand, which the
Yeah.
county doesn't do. The county, we put salt only down, so we don't sweep. We have a few small areas that we have to sweep. We generally don't sweep our roads because we are salt only. So there was some discussion as to whether that would be maintained if we increased the rate to, the county rate, whether we would still pay an additional rate for those that are using sand to sweep the roads. Or whether that would just be a decision that the county would make to either use sand or use salt, and if they use sand, then they would sweep. So I don't think that was resolved, or there was just some, I guess, discussion regarding that.
Just to follow up on that I know our sand went from $2 a yard to $6 a yard. You know, we put up 10,000 yards, so that alone was a $40,000 increase in using sand. But I would just point out that you know, if this is based on a 3-year average and the number is 238,000, it looks like the towns have subsidized the county to the tune of about 700,000 over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Well, actually more than that, because you just went to the 5,200 last year, right? It was lower than that.
Right,
the year
all
before
the
that.
rates went up 4%
Yeah.
for this year.
Yeah.
Yes, John?
I'm, trying to get a handle on the, snow removal proposed contract. Now, the sheet I'm on right now, is this one, Jeff? And in the right-hand corner, it's got estimate of payment, and down at the bottom in bold, it's bolded, $934,865.82. Is that payments from the towns to the county?
Oh, yeah.
That's payments
To the town, we're doing all
from the
those
county to the town.
roads. This is 149 miles of
Our
road.
current contracts for 2014.
Right.
We have budgeted that 934,000 we pay out to the town this year.
Okay, so you pay to the towns because they're plowing county roads?
Right.
And is this the proposed payment, or is this the actual payment?
This is current.
This year.
This is our current budget.
This is
This
current.
is this year,
To-
based on this 5,200.
Okay, and what's being proposed then? The change?
238,000 to the first column, the 151.49.
You need to go to, the 6,700 a mile rather than 52, right?
Right.
Is this number?
6784.
784, as opposed to 5207.
Oh, okay, so it wasn't side by side, so it's on different sheets of paper and, all right. So this number is being proposed to go to $6,784.02
Per mile, right?
per mile. So do we have a chart in how that tallies up someplace?
That's the 230, if you just simply did that and still paid all of the other amounts, some towns are getting $1,400 for additional, snow, ice removal, $710 for weight-restricted bridges, $554 for sweeping roads, et cetera. If you left all of those amounts in place and simply increased the 5207 to that 6784, the total cost on top of what we're currently paying, the $934,000, you would increase that amount by $238,000.
And where is that 238,000 figure here?
That's that sheet that I handed out, that had all those costs on it.
This one here,
Well, that's another sheet.
Yes, sorry,
I mean, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sheets.
And we actually tried to make this easy.
All right, but I think I'm there. Thank you.
I'd like to hear, Mr. Chairman, especially from these 4 smaller towns, you know, their thoughts on, does this have to happen immediately? Is this something we could do over a couple of years? 2/3 of this, you're bearing the brunt of it. In Orkin and.
So in Orkin, I'd love to say I'd like for it to happen yesterday, but, you know, I also, realize we have to do this properly so that everybody can adjust. We definitely are expending more money than what we're being, you know, compensated for. I don't think these have been adjusted to the increases in the cost of the trucks over the years, the tandems. I mean, we're looking at purchasing a tandem now, and it's close to $200,000. I think 207, well, we're
It's
looking
more
at
than
different.
200,000 now.
We're looking at one for less, but,
Bells and whistles.
compensation for our employees have probably doubled in the time that, you know, probably everybody's towns have through, you know, their fringes and everything else. I just don't think it's kept up to the actual cost to maintain the roads. I think the towns can do a better job unless we restructure and have departments set up in key areas. We get there probably quicker, I would assume, than the county would. You know, it's kind of a service thing too, or?
Well, again, if the county were to take them over, we would have to locate trucks
Yeah.
in those towns, whether on the town garage or, I certainly have employees in every town, so we would assign trucks based on their home locations.
I mean, part of me would say, hey, I'd love to rent space to the county, and we have a fuel depot there, and it would make it a whole lot easier, on the town budget. Our biggest deficit in the town is in the highway, and we're doing an awful lot of miles of road, and from the numbers, and I don't have concrete numbers, they did them a year ago, and I don't have that copy in the transition between the last supervisor and myself, and, but there is a deficit there, so.
Yes,
We have
Fred.
a question for Jeff. Do these numbers include the legacy costs of you know, retirees where we pay their health insurance? Yeah, and I didn't see anything for that.
I think we do separate that out, because we do track our labor costs for snow and ice.
Mhm.
That's a balance where, obviously, they're the same
Go for it.
personnel that are in the, road maintenance budget code, but part of their salary is covered under snow and ice based on actual time clock punches. And the benefits are proportioned based on those salary numbers. Yeah, what we did was on, no, so that's not, cause those would be down here, right? Ron? Yeah, so it doesn't include retiree costs or.
Retirees' health insurance not included.
The retiree stuff
No.
would be all under.
So that number is actually
5110.
substantially higher.
Yes, Bud.
Just so that I can understand this and wrap my head around it, if the county were to take over all of the plowing that the towns are doing for the county right now, does that mean that the towns would reduce their staff?
I think we'd have
We,
to.
we would have to, yeah.
Well,
Yep.
just wanna make sure we're not
Yeah.
adding cost to this by
Mhm.
having towns keep their staff and having us assume the additional.
At the same time, the county DPW would have to, I'd probably add 20 personnel to the highway division and buy 10 tandems.
That's or whoever they reduce in their staff, they get added to the county.
I'd be hiring a lot of constables.
Yeah,
Overtime.
probably right. Yeah.
Yes, Matt.
I could definitely lose one tandem, and I have an employee that, I probably will lose through attrition, so I wouldn't have to fill that position for sure.
Ron?
I've heard, seen state mile reimbursements, somewhere around $9,000 a mile. They're a lot like the IRS, you know, in the gas reimbursement, they're not doing you any favors there. You have to account for every penny, in terms of how you calculate. There may be things, Fred, that maybe, could be developed going forward. But I just have it in front of us, you know, hard numbers with some analysis on it. We've never had that before, and I think this is a very good thing. I'd like to see some movement on this, otherwise we're just gonna fall further behind the curve, and then it's gonna be that much more difficult going forward. Matt, did I understand you, that you'd like to see it happen all at once, but we didn't get here overnight, but it took a couple of years,
Yeah, I would be, yeah, 'cause, I mean, obviously, we've gotta squeeze everything into our current funding, and we're gonna keep doing our job, and, I'd love for it to happen immediately, but chances are, there's other higher priority things to do.
I don't know.
Not lose as much money as this one is, as far as they say it's going to be the improvements again to the town, but I also suspect the fact that there's a number of things on this list that for me, even though I'd like to see that money increase, I think sports and other things are even a higher priority, if you look at the overall county, but I would like to see it phased in slowly. I don't know if we can do anything this year, but at some point I would like to see it, at least that we make what we spend.
Right, I think that's the goal, is that the costs are covered. I think that's where we wanna be. And I think it also gets down to service too. I know, Warren County, when I was a councilman, tried to plow the Warrensburg Road, and that was about the most pathetic thing I ever saw in my life. Now, whether that would be the case today, I don't know. I wouldn't make that assumption, but I know in past experience, it was not a very good, pleasant experience. And I'll just put your phone number up and say, there's the man to call, right there. Yes.
Ultimately, the taxpayers in Warren County are all gonna pay the same amount of money, regardless of what we do, whether it comes from the county or the town. The idea is that we should be, you know, we should get what we expend, whether it's county or town.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah.
Yes, Fred.
And just point out, I think there are, some efficiencies in having the town do it, whereas, if you come out of a town road, then you go onto a county road, rather than have the plow up, when you go into the next town road, you have to plow down, but,
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Having been the one that we had to reduce this back in '09 when we, I think we ought to stop kicking the can down the road, put the 200,000 in the budget, get it to where it belongs, and just bite the bullet and do it, and then let the towns analyze it for the next year or so, because this has been going on, we've been piecemealing back in it, and if that's actually what it's gonna cost, the 200,000 to get it back up, put the 200,000 in the budget, give it to the town. I mean, it is all the same taxpayers, but let's try to make the towns, a lot of us are gonna really feel the pinch of this sales tax. I know we're talking about the sales tax hurting the county, but plus it's gonna hurt every one of us who have to do a town budget also. So it's a double whammy for us. The salt price went up 14%.
14.
It's going up 14% to next year, so that's huge, Jeff, especially in this. I mean, I for one say, put the money in the budget, meld it out fairly, and put it into the town budgets. If we have to take 200,000 more from our fund balance, 200,000 from our fund balance, let's get it done once and for all. Go from there.
Good.
I agree with Chairman Garrity. But what is it you want from us today?
Just a consensus as to how much, and if you want to, and how much.
On
That's
this
it.
topic only, or on,
Well, that's what we're on right now, so, yeah.
well, I think we should go this way.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
I'll second that.
Okay. We have a motion made and seconded. 238. Further discussion?
Just have a comment, we have some big, particularly the court number, we have a big number that we don't know.
Right.
I mean, from what I've heard and learned about this subject today is about the extent of it. I'm still trying to get my arms around it. Sounds like the right thing to do. But I'm just reluctant to make any decisions on any of these line items until we know what that court number is. Are we gonna have something to look at, tomorrow? Paul?
There is gonna be more information on the courts. I believe, Jeff, they were gonna try to give a ballpark.
Yeah, but our plan is tomorrow is to discuss all of the current alternatives that are being considered. One is, new construction on campus, one is, relocating any departments off campus to allow the courts to expand. And then the third option is, relocating the entire court system off campus. So we have some budgetary costs on the construction that would be required for option one. We have some lease ranges, I guess, what commercial leases expect to cost, at least to start the conversation, for some comparison, and hopefully narrow the alternatives, move forward.
So, you know, I mean, I'll go along with it today, but we're not really voting to put it in, I mean, because we've got to vote for the final budget. We're just voting that the committee is in general consensus that we're,
Right.
you know, we're.
If you're in
moving it.
consensus, it'll get in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's a good point too, though, just to make sure everybody's clear. Ultimately, at the end of the month, the budget officer will file a budget that is totally at his discretion as to what that budget will contain. And then ultimately, that budget then goes to the Board of Supervisors as a whole, and the board can do anything they want with that budget at that point. They can take money out, they can add money in, they can do whatever they want with the budget at that point. And then they have a public hearing on it, and then ultimately you have the final vote. So really, the purpose of this committee, and what the budget officer is really looking for, as well as the budget team, is just your reaction, your inputs, so that the budget officer kind of can get a feel for what he thinks will be supported in terms of where we want to go as a county on some of these issues. So, by committing and saying, hey, yeah, let's go with the 238, that doesn't lock you into place at all. And it doesn't even lock the budget officer in, because as he continues his work on the budget, he may find, for instance, we can't do it, and he may come back to you and file a tentative budget, for instance, that's half of that amount or something. But at least he knows that it's important to you, and that he will work to address it, and if he can address it in full, he will. And so that's the whole idea, is to get that type of information in, as well as what your thoughts are, for instance, on the sales tax and stuff. And then what we would do is we'd have another meeting with you when we further develop this with these inputs, and then we'll generate a new sheet and see how it's working through the multi-year plan to see if the budget works. And if it doesn't, then there's further discussion on continuing on, you know, what do we do now? Do we not do this, or do we do that? So this is a process, and it's a matter of just getting some initial reactions. And like I say, I can't emphasize enough that you're not bound by these reactions, you know, by what you're voting today. You're just saying, well, based on what we now know, this sounds like a reasonable way to proceed. Obviously, it's contingent on what the overall effects will be on the budget.
Yes, Brad.
Just one point on the court systems. I think it's likely that as we go forward with that, it's not something we're gonna pay in a lump sum amount next year, so.
Right.
So we would bond it, and then if we're gonna bond it, most likely the first payment would not be 2015, it would be 2016.
Correct.
So I don't think that's necessarily the reason to not go forward, with
That's a good
this.
point, Fred.
And then, the one other point on the snow and ice is that, you know, the towns have been bearing this increase, and we haven't, we've been doing it for more than 3 years. But the other point, I think, is that in the past, maybe the reimbursements were a little bit low, but there was a lot of compensation by DPW. They'd send up a big backhoe if we needed it, and we didn't get charged separately for the paving. But now the towns are paying for everything that they get from DPW, so it's more of, you know, it's a more fair accounting of the respective benefits to both the counties and the towns.
Yes,
I
Mark.
guess the point I'm making is, we've got a pro forma here that already takes 1.6 million out of our fund balance. We've got an additional 1.8 million, or 1.3 million, on this sheet. And we've got a sales tax that's 2.5% increase that I don't think anybody really feels comfortable with. So we're looking at roughly 2.9 million out of fund balance for this budget with all these additions, which are, every one of them's got merit. But we're really probably talking about 3.5 million or something like that if we put a lower sales tax projection in. So I just would like to see all that, you know, before everybody just jumps on board any one of these line items.
But that's all assuming the 1.57%
Mm-hmm.
increase rather than the 3.63.
Right, so that's the next thing, Fred, then, you know, what are we looking at potentially raising that, and that goes into the analysis as well.
Well, it's, there is a motion and a second on the snow and ice. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Right.
Okay. So let's grade down the list here, the radios and communications. 600,000 will probably get us in better shape than we are now, obviously. It's not the 6 million that was Televate projected. My own opinion is that you know, we can budget some of that, but I'm not comfortable budgeting 600,000. Maybe 100 or something like that. And if we need to do the 6 million, then we need to borrow it. I mean, that's my opinion. Yes, John.
I wasn't here for that conversation, so I'm sorry if this was a question that was already addressed.
No.
But in looking at enhancing our emergency, radio capabilities, are we looking at putting up towers to do that? And if so, is there some kind of arrangement we can make with the cell tower people where maybe we can rent space on these towers to them and get some revenue from this?
Well, there was a whole analysis that a company called Televate from Virginia conducted over the summer. And I think their recommendation to just get our radios so they would function better currently with the equipment that we have right now, I'm thinking it was 300,000, 400,000, something like that.
I thought it was 6 to 7.
Okay.
Is there a rate?
I think it was around 3 something.
Right. And then if we want to put up, I think there was 4 towers they had in there and new equipment. And then it was whether it was analog or digital. There was a difference in cost. It could go up to 8 million if it's digital.
Well, I was just wondering if, since cell coverage sometimes is lacking, that wouldn't we work in a cooperative nature
Well, you know,
with the cell peoples?
yeah, I would think so. I kind of thought that, you know,
Yeah.
I thought it might be a way for, Stony Creek to get some cell coverage, you know,
Yeah,
maybe
so
we
you
could
get
get a
both.
tower over there and we could actually have cell phones.
And maybe the cell
But,
people would put up a tower and let us use it with no,
But they felt that the
I
people
know.
in Stony Creek weren't worthy of, communications, so they left us out of the.
well, there, maybe we have to go in.
So I don't know as I support any of it.
Well, maybe if we were offering to help out with the tower, it would make it financially beneficial.
Right.
Just one of the problems you have with the towers is, you know, APA said they have to be substantially invisible, which means they can't be much above the tree line, so they already run into the other thing they want is co-location of multiple cell companies on the same tower, but it doesn't work to have the tower below the tree line and try to put multiple people on it. So, I mean, you could run into that when you try to put emergency services on the
Fred, would
same
that
tower.
work for a municipality trying to do the cell tower as well? Or for either case?
Saratoga County spent, I think, over $1.5 million trying to get their emergency services on co-location on existing towers.
You can apply for a waiver, but
Federal government is trying to control that.
So maybe we should try to get the money in that, that's needed to take care of what we have and make it function better. Because that was part of it. That was, you know, part of the presentation. And then if we're gonna go beyond that, I guess I would recommend borrowing the money and bonding it, or go a year at a time. You know. But I can't see, you know. Yes, Rachel.
I wanted to follow up on an email that I had sent previously, I believe it was to, the Public Safety Committee regarding the radio system upgrade, and it came to my attention that we have the ability to apply for up to $6 million in grants. So I'm wondering how this gets worked out. Do you go out for the bonding? Do you put it in your budget? How do you then, you know, apply for these grants? Do you put it back in your budget? I don't really know how that works. All I know is when they come and they speak to us at the board meeting, I would, for one, would really like to hear what are these grants that are available? What are the deadlines? Is this a real $6 million that we can be applying for? Because before we go out and charge the taxpayer, put it in our budget, and we can get $6 million in grants, with no county share is what I understand, that's a no-brainer. So I understand this is millions of dollars, and it's obviously, as Chairman Garrity has pointed out, incredibly needed. I'm not debating that, but it's a big price tag. So how do we hear more about the grant funding that's available?
Yeah, that's.
You know, other than just some sidebar conversation I've had, I think this is something that, you know, we're gonna get a presentation on why this is needed to the full board, not just at committee, but let's get a presentation on what's our timeline, what's our deadlines for this, what grants are available, who's applying for them, do we have the staff currently, to be applying for that type of funding? You know, before we're charging our local taxpayer that money or going out in that. So how does that work, the grant?
Certainly that'll be all part of the process, and that is one of the reasons why I mentioned very early on that, you would not be as concerned about the overall program in your 2015 budget because you're either gonna have grants or you're gonna have bonds or both. Certainly we would exhaust all of the opportunities to get bonds first. The bonding has to be applied for and received before you go to contract, because if you go to contract, you run the risk that the bonds will, or the grants will have certain dates in them that say, we will only fund you up to this date. And also you run the risk that the grants won't necessarily cover what it is that you're proposing. So you definitely want to apply for your grants first. And we will work with emergency services and the sheriff's office with regard to that. So I think it all, you know, you have to start somewhere, and I guess the first point is what is it that we need so that we, and then in turn, can have this information to apply for the grants. Because without understanding what the infrastructure is, you can't put in for the grant. So it's like the chicken and the egg. So at this point, now that we understand what it is and we have these recommendations, we can then now go in and start looking for grants. So certainly, I would not advocate, you know, budgeting $6 million next year. And even the 300 or 600,000, whatever that number may be, here again, that may be a number we want to further investigate before we commit to that.
I mean, it's my understanding there is grant funding available as it relates to that 600,000, but I for one would love to be able to hear from the sheriff and from Brian LaFleur and that grant funding that's available currently and how we would go about securing that, because we're throwing out these big numbers, but in reality, if the majority of that is covered,
Right.
I think that's important to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Fred.
I think we should then substantially reduce that down to some amount that would cover applying for grants next year and doing anything that's absolutely necessary next year, whatever that number is.
Right. I don't know if we have a firm number. I was thinking 200 to 300, but even that's a pretty heavy lift.
Maybe 100,000.
We may need to further investigate this
Right.
one before you can settle on that.
Yes, Dan.
Just that that's, what that firm did for their, contract and what they brought to us, that was stuff that we need to do in the short term.
Right.
I know that Brian's office is seeking out the grants and has some direction, but, we certainly need to look at that, because of the problems this narrow banding has presented, which was gone over in that meeting. So I think it's substantial. I know they had two different figures, maybe 300 and 200 and some odd, that tallied near 600,000, but at least this year, half of that 600, I would think. And hopefully we're successful with grant applications, but we need to move forward quickly and get something done to improve, and I think the chairman shares that because he's getting complaints from the emergency service operations.
Yeah.
Difficulties they've had.
I'm just, you're part of a storage team that is Essex, and Warren, I'm not sure about Washington, but that's how they do it every year, and they've been very successful getting grant money every year, and they make upgrades. I think this initial money was for changing antennas on the current towers that we have. We have dual antenna structures. They said to go to a single antenna would improve, and they did talk, John, you talked about sharing towers with everything else, and I did think, Frank, that I don't think they, said Stony Creek was out of the question. I think they need to go find the towers over there for structure, so, I think.
That's not what I heard.
I really think we ought to just bond the money and in contemplation that you're gonna end up having to do this, because it's not gonna get any better not doing anything. There are some short-term fixes they can do, and, I just think, here's another, it's public safety. And unless you are a member of one of those organizations, you can't sit here and say, well, it's okay, or we can delay it. Unless you sit home and don't know where you're going, or you got an officer out there chasing somebody, and he can't get back, you can't help. And it happens almost weekly. I mean, but I would say you bond it, or at least let them start to change the antennas on the towers like they suggested in the report, the vehicle report.
Right.
That's just my take. I'm with Danny. Dan was a fireman for X number of years. He knows this situation.
They're gonna make a presentation at our board meeting though,
Right.
so that would be helpful when everyone's present.
Yep. So maybe we'll put this discussion off
Yeah.
till then. The courts, that's kinda up in the air. Additional computer reserve, 83,000. Does that include the, virtualization?
That is the virtualization for next year. We're doing the internet, or the, network, I'm sorry, the network this year already. So this will be the other piece of it. And that I would put very highly in terms of critical, because our servers are aging, and if you have a failure there, that's gonna interrupt your entire governmental operations, or has the potential of that.
Yeah, it's, I mean, that's money that we have to spend, in my opinion, because currently we have about 30 servers, and they last if you replace them every 5 years, they're about 6,000 each, is 180,000. The virtualization will take it down to 3. Granted, they're more money. They're $22,225, but seems to be a lot better system instead of everybody having their own server, and it's be all one network and backed up. If one server goes down, the other one automatically kicks in. Just makes sense. Contingency, 50,000. Any opinion? Yes?
I'm in favor.
Anybody opposed? Okay. The fuel tanks,
We should be hearing, that application's in, and we should be hearing shortly.
Right.
And they did move it to a priority.
Right. So it could be 100 or it could be 5%.
5,000.
Soil and water hazard mitigation, that's a match situation. I'm not sure if the soil and water's time would count as match. I mean, would Jim's time count as match?
We'd have to get maybe more information on that one. Maybe for your next meeting, we can have that one tied down a little firmer.
Caseworkers?
Quick question.
Yes,
When you
sir.
said 50 to 75 estimate, was that total, or was that what we would just have to pay?
My recollection is, I think that was the match amount that we were looking at
Okay.
in that vicinity.
The caseworkers, that's gone through 2 committees. already and has been approved, so, I don't think there's really a lot of discussion on that one.
That has a 30,000 net, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
So there's, what, 100 and some revenue against that?
Yes, yep, 78% reimbursement. The payroll supervisor, not really sure why that's on here.
The reallocation.
Anyhow, I guess, you know, we'll cover that when we look through the requests for additional pay and bumps in their salaries. I don't see a lot of that gonna take place, but the rest of it is department head request. We're looking through those. I don't think, now the 2% across the board for the non-union, is that good with everybody, 2%? I mean, I think that's fair. If the union's getting 2%, the non-union should, as far as I'm concerned. And the supervisors and everybody should get it, as far as I'm concerned. There's no, you know. Yes. Fred?
I'd like to see I think I have seen it, but I don't have it handy, a longer projection for our debt service, because, I mean, it looks like our debt service is going down, and, you know, we're talking about bonding the radios and probably the court work, so it'd be helpful to see a longer term projection. You know, the courts have lasted us about 50 years, so I think it's certainly reasonable to bond that, and also the radios, the upgrade of the radio system seems reasonable to bond it, but I think it would be helpful to look at longer term projection of what our debt service is.
Okay.
That can be presented, certainly.
Any other topics for discussion? Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Frank, I mean, you always, this is for Rob, you always compare the band rates versus the bond rates.
Right.
Yeah, so, you know, the rates are pretty favorable now, you know.
Right.
So, I mean, I think with what we're retiring in bond, you could probably,
Cover it without changing our debt service.
without increasing your debt service,
Right.
I would think. Would you, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it should run down,
Yeah.
And I know the band rates are in the twos.
yeah.
And if you could look at one of these projects and pay it off within, I don't think you have to.
5 years.
If you could pay off one of these projects in 5 years, you may be even better off. I mean, I think that's a neat way.
That's something, are we getting to that point with the roads, so that it doesn't cost us more by, we've been putting this off for 5 years now? Does it help us in the long run? In other words, where the roads deteriorate so much where we have to do the whole rehab?
Is it financiable on the road?
You can bond certain, road improvements. The difficulty with doing that, though, is I'm afraid the county could end up in a trap whereby you bond and then you owe the bond payments and you're still trying to make additional road improvements. That's pretty tough. I mean, I've toyed around with that idea, quite frankly, myself, thinking maybe that's a good way to dig our way out. But it also has its pitfalls in terms of ending up in a situation where you're still doing, you know, you're funding your roads at where your level you're supposed to, and now you're paying bonds on top of that. I don't know if we're ready to do that or not. I mean, I guess maybe we have to think about it more and plan it out, but my instinct is that if we should be putting X number of dollars in the roads every year, then that's what we should be doing. It's almost like it's an operation cost. It's a constant operation cost that if we could just get it to where it needs to be and then throw a bump in every once in a while to help improve a little further, I think that would be it. And if I understood Jeff's projections, just to maintain is $3 million a year, and then I think if we put in, 3, 5, or 4, then we're gonna constantly see an increase, but that would be over a long period of time. I think your $4 million was over 10 years, right?
What I tried to do in some of those projections was make up for lost ground for those years where
Right.
we were virtually at about 60% funding for 5 or 6 years straight. And, there's only so much work that we would try and get done in any given year.
that $3 million projection in our original list included some reconstructions. Now, if we got to a point where we were making up some lost ground and we had fewer and fewer poor roads that needed reconstruction, we could go with, that might come down, if, you know, in today's dollars, that might come down in relation to that 3 million, because we'd be doing more maintenance type projects, doing the overlays. And just to comment on the prospect of bonding, you know, I think last year we looked at that, was it last year during the budget process, you know, what, would it be worth doing that? And I think we're, if we're on the path to recovery on our, and I agree with Paul, on our long-term plan, if we can get back to a annual amount that is just a break-even point, which is probably in that $3 million range, maybe over time that can come down a little bit as the pavement improves, then I think that should be the goal. The only time it makes sense to bond would be to catch those roads that are in fair condition this year and would fall into a reconstruction next year, and to be able to catch those in that year before their cost increases makes some sense, but it's a little bit hard to predict, you know, those roads that are on the cusp of, you know, being okay for an overlay going into this year. Are they gonna need a reconstruction or a serious rehab next year, or are they still gonna be in an overlay condition? You know, those are hard to predict. As we're budgeting into this year, we're trying to predict the pavement grades next spring after another season of costs. So that's, and I agree with Paul, those legacy costs of having to pay those bond payments reduced from that operating and maintenance costs.
It just seems to me that this can has been kicked down the road year after year after year, and we're getting to critical junctures where it's gonna cost, I might not be here, but the next supervisor replaces me, a lot of money that they shouldn't have had to spend if we did, in a timely fashion, the porous roads. And I think, you know, this started in 2008, we're preparing a 2015 budget, and I haven't seen, you know, the big bump put back into the roads. And we've been hearing the condition, and something has to be done.
Right.
Maybe it'd be helpful to see the roads that require complete reconstruction now and consider bonding just those, on the theory that that's more like a capital project, and then the rest of it's more like maintenance, the overlays.
Right, makes sense. Yes?
The one thing to consider when looking at the porous roads is once a road is so poor that it needs reconstruction, next year it's gonna be a reconstruction, the year after that it's gonna be reconstruction. So although the cost of construction might increase as it does annually, the cost of materials, you're not dropping off a cliff where it's getting to a more expensive treatment. Essentially, once a road is gone and needs reconstruction, it's gone, it can't get any worse.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the roads that we can overlay this year, if they fall into a rehab, that cost per mile of $100,000 might go to $150,000. And then a road that can't be rehabbed by milling off, you know, 2 inches and putting back two inches of good new asphalt, a road that falls out of that condition into reconstruction goes from that $150,000 per mile to $300,000 per mile.
That's what
and
you wanna avoid.
Where it might make sense in the near term to bond and hit them before they fall off into that next tier. It's a little bit hard to predict. But once a road is, if we can tolerate the poor roads, once they're in terrible condition and need reconstruction, they don't get any worse. As long as you can tolerate them and keep them safe enough to the with over time, they don't have a large increase in cost over the year.
Okay.
I wonder though, Rob, we should have a better picture on the third quarter sales tax by the middle of the month.
Yeah, October 15th will be the final payment for September.
I suspect that's gonna be very tight.
Yeah. I'm thinking, the next meeting of the budget committee, possibly on the 21st, Tuesday the 21st. By that time, we should have a lot of these things nailed down, and, we'll have made a decision, and see what happens. You can kick me around then. Anything else? Yeah, probably, yeah. Motion to adjourn? Moved by Fred, seconded by Ron, all in favor?
I think you're right on the, court, and then I thought about it, I think it's some expenses.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
but I think if you bond it,
These are all out
it can, it
Why
can
did you vote against that?
include those soft costs.
So
Bond.
it'll be a payback.
Yeah.
You know,
Are you going over to the college?
input's
'Cause I don't
good,
think we're gonna have
that
it
way you know where
I will go.
no, you're not throwing something out